Just say a few words about the Obama budget. Obviously, at this point in the game, if you're a fan of limited government, you know you're not going to get much. And once again, you didn't. You basically got a campaign document. The president's proposing to spend $47 trillion over the next 10 years. $6 trillion of that's just going to be interest alone. The publicly held debt as a share of gross domestic product, 80%, and that's throughout the next 10 years. Spending as a percentage of GDP continues to be at artificially high levels in between 23–24%. That's much higher than the previous 40-year average of about 18%. Now, of course, the president puts out a list of proposed spending cuts. This is a gimmick that President Bush came up with at a time when people were complaining that the W. Bush administration wasn't coming up with much in the way of spending cuts. Obama promises to cut $24 billion in what he calls savings. Obviously, though, if you're going to spend more money than you spent last year, you're really not saving anything. Most of the cuts are of the government efficiency variety. We're going to eliminate waste, fraud, and abuse, get rid of duplication. There's really nothing that inhibits or reduces the scope of government, which is a much more important issue. I'll say, unfortunately, the government efficiency stuff is often what Republicans justify spending cuts on, and I'll get into that in a little bit. You have discretionary caps as a result of the agreement to increase the debt ceiling. As a result, discretionary spending certainly looks to be a little bit better than it was going to be. Unfortunately, as you all might know, discretionary spending is a relatively small and shrinking part of the federal budget. Most of the money's in entitlement programs. The president proposes to do virtually nothing about entitlement spending. Mike Tanner's going to talk about that. You have the issue of sequestration coming up. Again, I'll see it when I believe it. Already, the Republicans have spent a lot of time complaining about the cuts to military spending. If I'm a betting man, I wouldn't be surprised if the Republicans trade higher discretionary spending in exchange for higher military spending to get around the sequestration, or they'll just go down the road of pushing these cuts out, using the baseline, make the cuts happen in the future in exchange for spending now. This is the gimmick that they just pulled off, both the Republicans and Democrats, to extend unemployment benefits and to continue the temporary cut in Social Security taxes. Will these caps hold? Probably not. Look, the bottom line is the federal government can spend money on pretty much anything it wants to. So even if they put these caps and any other such budget reforms, suppose we have another Hurricane Katrina, war with Iran, war with somebody at this point, another economic downturn. Look, even with taxes, Republicans justify tax cuts on the Keynesian premise that it spurs consumption and thus spurs economic growth. And that being said, even though most Republicans were opposed to the stimulus packages to get the economy going, most Republicans helped themselves behind the scenes to the various programs that was spending stimulus money. So we kind of know what we're getting or what we have with President Obama. One question is, what happens if Obama loses and a Republican wins? Probably safe to say Newt's out, and it's probably down to Santorum, Romney, and perhaps Paul. Towards the end of the year, I went around the various campaign websites, and I looked at what are these guys and gals specifically proposing to cut, because to me that's the big issue right now with the Republicans is, not just cutting spending in general, but specifically, what are you going to cut? What are you going to do? You say you're for a balanced budget. You're all for voting for a balanced budget amendment, but what are you going to actually do, even if you had your balanced budget amendment, to get, say, from 24% spending of GDP down to 18%? That's when you hear crickets. If you look at the spending proposals, at least on the campaign websites, basically Ron Paul's the only one who's promising serious cuts. He actually put a budget together. Romney, not very specific. And in fact, you can see where there's going to be spending increases. Newt's interesting. You might have some reforms, but again, and then Santorum, who has a record of supporting things like No Child Left Behind, Medicare prescription drug. You know, so and there was a report last week put out by another budget group that said if you looked at the 4 candidates, 3 of them are proposing more debt because they want to cut taxes but continue to spend. So even if you have a Republican in a White House, it seems to me that if you look at the folks who are the leading contenders, it might be George Bush all over again. So assuming most of you guys and gals here are congressional staffers, I think it's going to be really important that your bosses be the ones to get specific. And right now, again, you hear on Capitol Hill from the Republicans in particular, because let's face it, the Democrats can never spend enough money, but what you hear from the Republican side is we need a balanced budget amendment. Even worse, I'm hearing stuff now about biennial budgeting every 2 years because suddenly the government's going to get religious about oversight, which is an absolutely horrible idea. So our recommendation is get specific. And let me just take one issue and sort of explain what I mean here. Corporate welfare, subsidies to businesses. I'm currently working on an update of Cato's numbers, paper that should be out ASAP. And basically we spend about $100 billion subsidizing businesses. So if your boss is going to take on a program, have a laundry list. And you can't just do the waste, fraud, and abuse stuff or the duplication. You have to focus on what's the, what should the government be doing? What shouldn't the government be doing? And so, for instance, business subsidies distort economic activity. Well, if you're not familiar with the Federal Housing Administration, get familiar with it because a bailout's coming. Because basically the FHA has stepped in and is backing all these mortgages in order to keep the housing market afloat, and they're running up massive losses that are soon going to be on the taxpayer hook. At the same time, you're continuing to shove people into houses who shouldn't be in houses. That causes problems and losses in the economy. Harms other businesses and consumers. Small Business Administration, perfect example. Only 1% of small businesses out there actually get SBA loans. So what that means is the other 99% of small businesses are basically disadvantaged by these government programs that are helping subsidize their competitors. Privileges, special interests. Look, nobody knows this better than you guys. What do you see coming into your office all the time? Do you ever have a taxpayer come in and sit down and say, you know what, that Economic Development Administration, what a waste of money. It's a relic from the 1960s. We need to get rid of this. No. You have lobbyists coming in all the time. You have folks from back home. In Washington is an echo chamber. It's a constant bubble where you're constantly said spend, spend, spend. And again, if you make the argument, if your boss is willing to, step out and say, no, there's the broader public to keep in mind. No, we understand this is important to you, but it does damage the economy, it disadvantages it. That's the arguments you have to start making. 2 more quick points. Government and business collusion creates an unhealthy relationship. Look at TARP. That's a very unpopular, and it really galvanized public perception that government and business is way too close. But a lot of the people that made the decisions to hand out our money to these firms on Wall Street and these other financial firms, they were there. And then they come up to the Hill, and then when all's said and done, they'll be back. And so, again, you have this unhealthy relationship. Last and most important, it violates the Constitution. I'll give you one program for an example, community development block grants. I'm sure you guys are all getting stuff from local officials back home saying about it's so important that we have these federal subsidies. Look, things like wine bars, things like shopping centers, that's what this federal money is going towards. And if you tell me that somehow is the general welfare clause or as interstate commerce, Jack Link's beef jerky company in Wisconsin getting subsidies from the Community Development Fund, or a wine bar in Connecticut, or a brewery in Michigan, then it's not there. So focus on the specifics, put together the arguments, do the legwork. We're helping you do the legwork with the information and research. If you go to downsizinggovernment.org, we're going department by department, program by program, and we're putting together the numbers and the arguments and the research that will help you make the case to get rid of this stuff. But again, going forward, it's time to stop with the generalities, get specific, or else we're going over a cliff. Thank you.